And welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, a show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives of the world's leading global brands. Today, we're joined by Veracelle Vega, who's a Chief People Officer at Resident Home. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
I have to say that you definitely have the best background of the week. The fact
Thanks
that I
so
thought it
much.
was a
Thanks so
green
much.
screen.
It does look like a green screen. Yes, the sun is shining. We've had horrific weather here in upstate New York, so the sun is shining today on this podcast, which is great.
Just came out for us. We got
It
lucky.
did come out for you guys. Yes, yes.
So
Excellent.
first of all, how are you?
Oh my goodness. I think like everyone trying to adjust to what this brave, new, surreal world looks like and adapting really quickly. I'm from New York and live in Brooklyn, but we've been in upstate New York for 6 weeks now, 45 days. I'm not counting at all. And I actually have a calendar here. I call it my COVID calendar. I've been literally marking off the days. I don't know where it's going to get me or how many days it's going to be, but kind of makes me feel good in the morning when I check that.
Yeah.
When I check that.
As long as you don't have to buy another calendar, because then it's going to get real, really real.
I may need to I may need to do that. But yeah, 45 days adjusting like every parent, worker, and just person out there, just reading the news, looking at the news, trying, and at work too, just trying to figure out what this new normal is going to be. And again, like we don't know what the bottom line is, but we're doing great.
Before we jump in, tell everyone a bit about yourself personally and your sort of journey to where we are today.
Sure, sure. So I like to say that I am a classically trained HR generalist.
Love it.
And what does that mean? Like most HR people who end up in HR, I actually did not study it at all. I don't even think it was a thing 20 something years ago. I studied political science and international relations. Thought I wanted to be a lawyer at one point in time. Then I thought I wanted to go into the Foreign Service at another point in time. It wasn't until grad school that I took a course in human resources. And I remember thinking, oh, what is this? And the study of people. And it was just really interesting. And probably about 5 years ago, I was kind of looking out the window of what my next career trajectory would be. And a recruiter I knew kind of reached out to me out of the blue and said, look, there's a marketing technology firm. They're looking to have their first head of HR. Would you be interested? So I have to say from there, I've been in the startup space for about 5 years. So I was at a marketing technology firm for a little bit. Pardon me. And then I was an AI machine learning startup for a little bit. And all roads have led me to my dream job, which now is Chief People Officer for Resident Home. And we're the fastest growing D2C mattress brand that's out there and have really worked our way up over the past 3 years to become that industry leader. So my career has been really varied. I've been in the government, I've been in media, startup, but I love the startup space. And I have to say, not only in the startup space, but in the area where companies are going from being, very small and just kind of loose and like we'll figure it out to, oh wow, now we need to put some processes into place. And now we've had folks that have been here for a little bit, but now they're looking for like, what's my next career path going to look like, and how do you help managers figure that out? So I want to say that's the piece that I'm passionate about. Every area of HR, but the transformation piece specifically is something that I just love.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just describing my business, by the way.
There you go.
We're getting to that point as the start where in the beginning it was very much just loose, kind of go with the flow and the team. But now we're starting to, as we're growing, we realize we need to put some processes in place.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And to me, that's the most fascinating piece. It's almost like companies are going through like puberty and they're growing up, and it's never, and when you transform, it's never, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's the things that worked 3 years ago, 3 minutes ago, 3 months ago are not going to work when you scale. And how do you get there? And to me, that is it's that, section of a company's history that you can make the most impact in.
Yeah, definitely. So just going back to, because obviously the topic of today is obviously the importance of developing an HR roadmap. We obviously jump into that a bit more detail, but I'm interested in understanding from public sector to media and entertainment, what was the biggest challenge that you
Right.
faced moving over? Because it's very different, very, very different. I know from other conversations I've had. What's the biggest challenge you faced? What did you take over which was positive, and what are the areas that you realized that this is, a whole new world?
Right, right. No, that's a great question too. And the one thing my biggest takeaway for any HR leader and up and coming HR leader, you have to adapt. You have to adapt. I cannot emphasize that enough. When I was in the government, I find myself really fortunate because I was exposed so early on in my career of the importance of training, the importance of, learning and development, the importance of how you go through a performance improvement plan. And I just thought that every company operated like that. And like, here's a set of rules, off you go. And you just kind of followed that.
Mhm.
So it was interesting when I transitioned to media. And while the Fox had been around for a long time, at least the group that I was in, it was a little bit of, they didn't really have a lot of that. And so I kind of came in, I'm like, right, we can do this. But then I realized really quick, I'm like, oh wow, there really is no guidebook for this. I'm going to take the best pieces that I've pulled from my government experience, and I'm going to kind of transition this in a way that's going to make sense for this business. Because you probably interview how many folks, Chris, that it doesn't matter what template you have. You have to be able to adapt and shift to it because every company is
Not one
different.
size fits all, yeah.
It's not a one size fits all. My biggest takeaway though is like the pace. And so in the government, it was very different. You could literally go away for 3 months on end and be trained, right? And then come back up and come back and like, everything's great. You can't do that in a startup. You can't do the other companies. I
Yeah.
think back on that, I'm like, oh wow, I can't believe that that's
Yeah, that must have been a big shock because it's, like, very stable and, predictable in government.
when I first started in the government, probably a week into my tenure there, I was going to a retirement party for someone who had been there for 35 years. And I'm like, wow, that's extraordinary. But I remember thinking like, I don't know if I could be here for 35 years, but like you just don't have that nowadays. If you get to the 1 year mark in a startup, that's like 10 years for some
Yeah.
people.
It does feel like that, to be honest. So when you joined, this was first startup and you had to work with those co-founders to build this HR roadmap, what did that look like? What were some of the barriers?
I think what was really exciting was, right, we want to build a company within a larger company, but we have to do that quickly. And so, you had to deep dive into your resources, into your pockets and the first thing is always talent. Who do we get to come on board? How do we do this fast? And you have to work on their time frame. And these things specifically in startup, you can't have a roadmap that's going to take 10 years out. And it has to be fast. It has to be quick. You are doing this on the fly and relying a lot on instinct.
Yeah.
You think, well, and then that's half the trick of it. Relying on your instinct, like, what, I think this person is going to make a really great right hand for you. And here's why. And so the trick was, how do you do this fast? But also kind of, and this is where I guess where the roadmap piece comes in. You have to use that HR roadmap, no matter what company you're in, as your North Star. Because at the end of the day, any HR person will say, like, what do you want out of your company, and what is your biggest goal and vision? Yes, is it to have really great finances from the company side and make sure they're doing well? Absolutely. But every company and every HR person wants their organization to be best in class. And how do you measure it? It doesn't matter how many accolades or awards, it's what your people are saying and what the company feedback is. And so that is always the end goal of making sure that you're developing organizations that people want to stay, they want to grow, they're happy at the end of the day. But this is what makes the best. And like, to me personally, that's what makes the best.
Yeah, because I know a lot of co-founders and entrepreneurs who have startups, and that sometimes is at the very back of their priorities.
Totally.
Like,
Absolutely.
it's about, how do I get my next sale? How do
Absolutely.
I get the
Absolutely.
product to market? The last thing they're thinking about is culture, leadership,
Absolutely.
building that
Absolutely.
foundation. It's
Absolutely. And that's where the pivoting comes in a company life cycle, because you're right. In the early days, And when you have an idea and you have an idea that's going to stick, you're not thinking about learning and develop. You're not thinking about learning and development for these folks. You're not thinking about what their career paths are going to be. You're thinking about like, what idea do we have that's going to make this stick? And so it's easy to hire and engage folks to come on board, and that early creation, because the end goal is, let's see if this is going to work. And so that's really exciting, and that's all hands on deck, and everybody's into it. But then all of a sudden you get to the 2-year mark, right? And the people that were really excited in the beginning are now saying like, actually, what is my career path? And as a co-founder or as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, oh shoot, I didn't think about it. And it's just really common because you're not the full trajectory. And again, this goes to the roadmap. People like, right, let's, the first year, let's see if this is going to stick. Let's bring on the best folks that we can. But this is why I'm a massive believer in having HR there. And not a lot of companies do this at the beginning. Like, this is great and all, but I guarantee you in a year or two, these folks that are really excited are going to come back and they're going to say, what's my next step? Or maybe they have titles that, yeah, right, you can be head of this right now, we'll figure it out later. And then all of a sudden you're at that point where like, oh crap, it's that figure it out later piece. And the title that they have now does not even make sense with what they were doing a year ago. And now we got to kind of look at organizational alignment and structure to make sure like this look right. And that's where the transformation comes into play.
Yeah. When you're developing the roadmap and then presenting it to the team, I'm sure you've done that in multiple businesses, government, large scale, corporate, startups. What are some of your tips and advice to people? What works, what doesn't?
Yeah.
What have you learned? Maybe mistakes that you've made.
Right.
I'm not going to do that
again. And a lot of it's a lot of learning. You Google any site, right, with HR of like things that an HR person needs to know within their first 60, 90 days. Anybody, I don't want to say anybody can come with a plan. It is all well and good to say, here's what I'm going to do 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And by 90 days, I'm off and running. It never happens like that. I think in a perfect universe, sure. But 90% of the time, it doesn't. Now, what I've learned this through trial and error, and it seems so obvious in the early days of being in a company, you have to go on a listening tour. You have to go on a listening tour. You have to really listen to what all your key stakeholders are saying. And you know what? They may all be saying different things. And so while you have to pay attention to that, at the end of the day, what are the founders saying? What are the CEOs saying? Because if you don't have that alignment and you're only going with what the marketing person is saying, or the the chief technology officer is saying, but you're not listening to anything that the CEOs are saying, you're going to be set up for failure because you're not listening to that. So it has to be a balance. I have to say the roadmaps that I've used have varied from company to company. I've been in companies where learning and development is mission critical, and that's first and foremost. I've been in other organizations where it's recruiting and getting that up and running, but you have to pay attention to what the CEOs are saying, plus the key leadership team, and then at the end of the day too, your folks. And so it's going to be a mix, and you're not going to be able to be all things to all people. But I've always looked early on, and I made the mistake of just like, well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm doing this, and now we have more processes into place, and that's great. But when you're presenting to boards and you're trying to put together really thoughtful deck of what it is that HR has been doing for the past quarter, I realized early on that I'm like, I need to strategize this better because I'm doing a lot, but I can't really articulate what it is that me and the team have been doing for the past 3 months. And so it's almost like you have to whiteboard it. And when you almost write everything down, all of a sudden you see the trees through the forest and you see these pillars to develop. And this is what becomes the HR roadmap. And so when you go on these listening tours and you're listening to the CEOs and you're listening to the senior leadership team, all of a sudden, if you put in your head, right, I'm hearing a lot of talent development, I'm hearing a lot of learning and development, I'm hearing a lot of internal communications, I'm hearing a lot of HR processes and operations. And so when you start to bucket all that and you're using that as your guide, it's easy to populate key tactics to see what everyone is saying. And so what I like to do, every quarter, actually we do this even once a month, like here are the pillars that we've been working on, and here are the tactics with it. So I can say that I've implemented a new recruiting tool. Great. You're going to have the board saying, well, why is that important? and how do you measure it? Well, it's like we're trying to find folks faster. And by using this tool, it's going to cut down on our time to fill, our time to hire time. Here are the metrics that say it. And you know what? This new recruiting tool is part of talent management, which is is exactly something that I'm hearing across the board of something that we need to focus on. And you know what? At the end of the day, that leads to what it takes to be a best-in-class organization. So you have to really you really do have to see the forest through the trees. And I use these pillars as my consistent North Star. Now it's changed throughout the years, and it's absolutely changed from organization to organization, but I have to say it's been my guardrails in helping me be organized and helping the team be organized at the end of the day.
One of the common challenges I see when people are going on these listening tours and new roles from your peers is doing that, but whilst getting some quick wins and demonstrating value as you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because, I think it's definitely right. You need to spend, some leaders I think to even spend up to a year on that listening tour and before they come with any full sort of concrete strategy to the leadership team, which actually is ends up being worth it.
Right.
Instead of coming with something based on your experience in other organizations, just sort of plug and play, which we discussed earlier, doesn't really work most of the time. So how have you balanced that in your career? Adding value, demonstrating value, getting quick wins whilst building that bigger roadmap?
Right. That's also a great question. You have to wear both hats of being both tactical, and I have to say in the startup world, you have to be in the weeds, especially in the beginning, because you have to, you have to dig in there. And so that's great and all, but you also have to balance it with the vision on both ends. And so it's a mix. It's a mix of both. I've seen, doesn't even have to be an HR leader. I've seen executives who are way too deep in the weeds, where this is where you see like, well, they are probably a really great manager, but are they a leader and are they a visionary? And it's sometimes you have to be like, sometimes you have to know what your team is doing. You have to be engaged. You have to roll up your sleeves, and that's great, but you got to balance it. You got to balance it with the great ideas. Now, on the flip side, you also can't be so strategic that you're missing what's going on at the bottom.
Yeah.
And I've seen both sides of this as well. And it's a hard balance. Once you're very aware and you try to just like, all right, what am I doing that's big picture and moving the needle, but what else am I doing just in terms of, I don't want to say fix it, or like what are some small wins that we can have here? That's the great, to me, and I'd say it served me well. That's where the balance is.
Yeah. In terms of the weeds, how did you find going from large organization where you've got teams for all of the areas that you discussed?
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it's all on you.
Yeah.
You don't have you don't have all the resources. You don't have, all of these teams in place to deliver it. And now all of a sudden you're in the weeds, having to do everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you find that? I know for me personally, when I started the company, that was a bit of a wake up call.
Yeah.
I am marketing, I am operations, I am production, I am finance, I am everything.
Right.
How did you find that? Because I know a lot of your peers that I speak to, that's something when they join a startup, it's all great. So they're excited about it, and then they're gonna get in and they're like, oh, it's me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think too, when specifically in the startup world, there's some hats that, you never talked about during your interview, but they just kind of naturally gravitate towards you. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was me, but okay, let me switch that hat. I think a perfect example, leaving Fox and going to the start when at Fox and media, which was big. And we had this like really like 41 floors, and it was just, this New York building, to like a small space that was really small, a really small space that was kind of old. And I remember that one time the heater didn't work, and everyone's kind of looking around, and I'm like, oh, I have to.
That's a HR thing, yeah.
I have to do that. Like, oh, I have to do that. Like, we just can't call somebody. And this, if we can call somebody, we gotta find that person. I'm like, oh, I was so used, and it's things that you don't think about when you're at a big company, because you just make a call and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I guess I need to figure that out. So it is, and you have to have a very thick skin about it too, because it's a lot of this stuff that is gray just kind of falls on HR. But you know what? When I interview folks too, and you say, are you a team player? And they answer, sure, I am a team player. Like, of course they're going to say that, but like, are they really? And there are ways to kind of probe.
Yeah, well, give us an example of when.
Yeah, give me an example of how you really rolled up your sleeve.
Well, my former boss used to always, in his interviews, say, give me 3 examples of each of those questions.
Exactly.
Because normally someone has like a pre-rehearsed first one. They kind of you expect most interviews for someone to say, give me an example of where you demonstrated that. And people are like, they've got that prepared. When you ask someone, give you 3 examples.
Exactly.
Like, it's too many.
Exactly.
But yeah, you are right. Those moments that you realize, wow, okay, this is completely different. Similar of us when we set up our first office and we had to set up the internet ourselves and build our server and do all the technical this phone system, and even to build, even the point with building the desks, and we're like, this is like, we can't call our tech guy up.
Absolutely.
And sort things out.
Absolutely. I think there was a point in time I could tell you really good air conditioning places to call if the air conditioning went down, things that I never knew I'd be an expert in. Or I remember we had one office that it was literally raining really hard outside and the roof started caving in. And at a big company, you make a phone call and somebody's there within 2 seconds. But like, what do you do? So we all started looking for buckets, literally, as the roof is caving down on us. But it does open your eyes. But it is just another example of how you literally have to be in the weeds with some of the stuff.
Tell everyone briefly a little bit more about the company, and let's tie that in with the HR roadmap, because obviously the business is growing exponentially. You've got multiple brands underneath that. How does that affect the HR roadmap? Has it had to be very fluid and adaptable? Because your business can be, Casper Mattress, the acquisition. What does that mean for you guys as well? Because that was obviously a big deal. Talk a bit more about that.
I'm having the best time. This is my dream job. If you would have asked me like 5 years ago, right, that I would be head of HR for a mattress company, I would have been like, what is that? And the D2C space has just dramatically changed over the past, I want to say, even year. And so I was perfectly happy where I was at my last startup, and a recruiter, I know a lot of recruiters, and a recruiter had reached out to me, and then they said, there's this rising mattress company. They're really making waves and being an industry leader, but they need a more sophisticated HR than what they have now. And they're looking for someone to take it to the next level. It was interesting because
the first thing, let's be honest, the first thing you was like, mattress company?
I did. I'm like, mattresses. And my idea of mattresses is what folks typically think of.
Walk into a shop.
You go to a shop.
You sit on the mattress, you go, oh, is this a good mattress or not?
Exactly. You sit down, you go to a store, you kind of roll around, like, does this work? Does this not work? It's kind of like, the 3 bears, and like, this one's too hard, this one's too soft.
Exactly.
And it is really, that's the mattress industry space specifically has, it's just very fascinating. I had an old Tempur-Pedic mattress for 20 years. I'm talking like coil and springs that I think my husband and I, we bought it when we first got married, and it's literally on its last leg. But before I joined Resident Home, it was one of those things where I kept saying like, just the idea of going to a store, just trying all this out, it's just not appealing. So the whole thing is about convenience. It's about, what is going to be a lifesaver on our time. It's also about performance marketing as well. And we have really great deals right now that are going on, not only with buying a bed, but you can get sheets and pillows as well. And so all of a sudden it becomes a one-stop shop of, oh, wow, we can buy a mattress. Plus they have these really great promotionals. Sign me up. Whereas, years ago it was like, I got to go find a bed and I got to go find a mattress, and just kind of interlaying that all into a one-stop shop has really, has has been amazing for
and
us.
just for everyone that is aware of listening, which is where it's taken off, is the customer experience is completely changed. It comes in a box,
Mhm.
vacuum sealed. You
Yeah.
open it up and then it expands over a few hours,
Yep.
and it's like ordering a mattress off Amazon almost. The same
Yeah.
customer experience. And you can send it back if you can send it back if you don't like it, and just the whole
Exactly.
experience of it's completely changed, and now it's all driven by performance marketing as well.
Absolutely.
Is really what
Absolutely.
fueled the growth.
Absolutely. To go back to your question of like how it's transformed and how it's changed, the D2C space is the wave of the future. If we didn't know that before, it's absolutely going to be mission critical. The idea of stores and brick and mortar stores you see all the time are, I don't want to say disappearing from the landscape, but it doesn't help that COVID just kind of sealed the deal with some areas of like, what is this experience going to be? But that said, too, so not only is the customer experience changing in the way that we look at retail, but I also want to say the employee experience is changing as well in what office space is going to look like after this is all said and done. And so maybe it's not going to be office space that sits 5,000 people, and I've never been in an office that has 5,000 people, but that experience is gonna change. And it'll be interesting to see how in a roadmap, HR folks are kind of planning for that.
Yeah, what does that look like?
And what that looks, and what that looks like.
How's your roadmap changed then, given the current events? How has that affected your current roadmap?
Oh my goodness! If I would have presented to a board, at the end of February, and just looking at it today, it is transformed dramatically. And I realize this actually because every month we put metrics together to show our CEOs of just what we're doing. And I have to say our verticals have, I don't want to say, like, it's still really important that we are developing the best talent out there. So talent management is still one of them. Internal comms is still one of them. HR operations is still one of them. However, we've also added subcategories to these pillars in the roadmap. So now it is, what does a work from home space look like? What does a new office space look like? What are we doing in terms of, even more so than ever, engagement and employee engagement is like top of mind. Wellness as well, which again, wellness is important for every organization, but now, I mean, it's standing out to be its
when people being isolated, health and well-being right now should be an all-time high priority for everyone.
Exactly.
We've got people even in my own team who are at home on their own, very isolated, with no family locally, and we need to make sure we're doing more than just having a morning meeting virtually. Say hello to them. That's not enough.
No, it isn't, and it's one of those things where I think HR leaders always like, yes, wellness is absolutely 100% important. Mental health, physical health, important, but it stands out now, and it stands out as its own vertical. HR folks need to be ahead of this because, I mean, we're all going crazy having cabin fever and trying to make the most of it. And so while we can joke about it, like, oh yeah, like going nuts, but it's I don't take that lightly, and it's something that, in order to build that next level of talent and employee well-being, you got to focus on it. So that is since shifted into being the standalone now, which is great, and something we're really super passionate about at Resident Home. And we have always had wonderful employee engagement, but now even more so that we are fully distributed. We started out actually as a fully distributed workforce, and so for us it was incredibly easy to pivot, and we had an all hands 3 days after lockdown went into place and went off without a hitch. Everyone was on Zoom. We were like, no problem. We were able to shift. But Zoom is not going to make a culture, right? And it's something that, like, we even putting little things into place, like everybody needs to make sure their cameras are on, just like make sure you're all logged on. And so it's those little things of what we're actually creating right now, a playbook on how we work and how we operate it. I had to tell my team, like, I know that we're writing all this down and it's like we're writing a book, but I swear it's going to serve us well. It's going to serve us well in helping us to kind of even populate more of the roadmap and how we've transformed and pivoted specifically this year.
Have you done any surveys recently to your employees to see what the feel is out there? If so,
Yeah.
what the feedback?
Right. So we did, when in the fall, we did an engagement survey, and I love surveys. I love them, love them, love them. It's my favorite thing. Like,
Depends what software you're using, or because other people hate them. They're like, oh, so much. It takes 3 months to do a survey.
Well, I'm a big fan of Lattice, and so there's a plug for Lattice. And
Lattice.
I know every HR person has.
Yeah, they do.
And so they joke, because I do talk about Lattice a lot. But I just love, because it's just the functionality is easy, but I like it because they have built-in they have surveys there that you can kind of pull your own. So we did one back in September of things that we need to focus on. The score that we absolutely achieved the highest was everyone is 100% laser focused on making Resident Home the best place to work, the best D2C mattress company out there. And so and we really want company success. So that is 100% extraordinary. And it still is, we even more so in the fact that our sales are just phenomenal and we're doing so well. It's been the silver lining, and I don't say that lightly either in this age of COVID. Like, we're just, we're onto something there. But we're going to do a survey again as kind of a 6-month follow-up to see how else we've been trending. A lot of things that we had to work on were communication, which I've had in every, it doesn't matter what organization.
You can never over communicate. Yeah.
You can never over communicate. And how are we doing that? Feeling valued and making sure that we're taking care of our employees. And I have to say too, like, this is where the roadmap has shifted a little bit in the feeling valued, but and definitely from a wellness perspective.
Yeah. Have you done anything over the last few weeks to be changed that much to help further support your employees working from home?
Yeah, we have. I mean, little things. We have virtual CEO office hours. I have people office hours. I was talking with a team last week, and we use Slack a lot. And I was thinking, like, oh my God, what did we do without Slack before? Or Office Teams, and just like having that just
speed. Yeah, I've been
or like I don't even know my own phone number. And so like the idea of just like calling on the phone right now, and why do that when you can do it through Google Hangout or whatnot? But it has shifted, but you have to make more of an extra effort, specifically when it's work from home. I mean, that's just first and foremost. But one of the things too, in becoming work from home, you have to put that extra effort in. You have to. And while you may not hear from somebody or a teammate, it doesn't necessarily mean all the time that everything's great. There's nobody will ever fault us, and we say this all the time. Checking in.
Yeah, you are, because you have to be intentional about that, because in the office you might walk past someone and it naturally happens, or you might meet at lunch and or the water cooler chat. Those aren't organically happening anymore. So you have to be intentional about reaching out. And that's something I'm conscious with. Like, although I do speak with my team all day through WhatsApp and other groups we have, and obviously on Zoom, there are moments where I'm like, wow, I haven't checked in with Esha the entire day.
Yeah.
But whereas I'd normally walk past her desk and be like, how are you today?
Right.
So that's something that I've had to become intentional about, and make sure I consciously set notifications to say, check in with the team, check in with Shane, check in with Ivan. And I don't think I've done a great job so far. So it's something I've kind of consciously made sure. Even today, I had a call with my team this morning and said we're struggling to see progress and measure it, because we don't have a system in place at the moment to see, what is Shane doing throughout the day? What is Ivan doing? What does that look like? And how do we measure that? Because before we could see it, we was in the office, we could talk to each other, we could have a quick meeting. But now I don't know, they don't know what I'm doing at home, and vice versa in some areas. So we realize there's definitely some gaps of areas that we need to improve on. It's hard for me to recognize as well. Like, I want to recognize people for the hard work they're doing and the great work they're doing it. But if I can't see it, then it's hard for me to be able to recognize them and just saying, great job. Like, that's part of the thing that I love to do all the time. It's just every time someone gets a sale or Ivan puts out a great piece of content, sometimes I miss it. Because we're not together.
Absolutely. Even we have a weekly HR global meeting every Tuesday. We're going to have one. This is an idea from my HR manager, actually, which is actually pretty awesome. So we actually start our meetings with, what are you thankful for? And it may seem super hokey and we're like holding hands and just singing Kumbaya, but I have to say, it kind of gives us a pause of, you have to check in, right? Like, you have to check in right now. We would be inauthentic if we were just operating as, I'm like, right, so let's
nothing's happened.
Yeah, that none of this has happened. So we actually go around and we talk about one thing that we're super grateful for. And it's my favorite meeting, and every week we try to vary it, but it does make us pause a little bit and kind of take in this craziness that's going on in the world. And you have to, to your point, we have to make more of a conscious effort of it, specifically in a work from home environment.
Throughout this conversation, I think one thing that stood out to me is the fact that you have those core pillars in place. And then, as you said, based on the current events, they've kind of been updated and iterated. You kind of got subsections of each, but you still operate from that core foundation. That doesn't change.
And that doesn't change. No, and that doesn't change. And for me, specifically, operating in this age of COVID, like, you have to keep that roadmap. And it's fine when the roadmap differs a little bit. And even last month, while we were trying to scramble and figure out what this new normal would look like, we actually spent a lot of time in HR policies, and we were able to bang out a couple of things which are moving the business, which we're really proud of. And that's great and all. And this month, like, wow, I never would have thought wellness was going to be the big, which is fine, because at the end of the day, it all bubbles into employee engagement, which is super important. And so that's how we're going to pivot that a little bit. And that's the thing, like, you have to be very agile. And I think this is the perfect example of, okay, let's throw a couple scenarios in the world that may take place. All right, HR person, go. How do you develop? And
but that's part of what you need to be a HR leader. I keep saying it all the time. If you can't operate in the unknown and in disruption, then probably shouldn't be working HR, because
absolutely,
that's not the role.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? It's also, I'm going to say, I think every leader will say it's the responsibility, but I'm going to say it's HR's responsibility. But it is ours. I'm going to say it is our responsibility to be talking to your CEOs, like, here's how I'm thinking about this. Here's how I'm thinking about this. And it doesn't necessarily mean, like, I'm not saying here's how I'm thinking about this and the way it should go, but, like, here's what I'm seeing. Here's how we should be thoughtful about this. And you have to crowdsource just to make sure, am I on the right page? Are you hearing the same thing too? And 90% of the time, like, yes. So let's work on that together, because I would be remiss if I next month presented my deck and there was nothing there that touched upon what this new world is. And for me, and to the question earlier, to me, that's not being strategic and, using my North Star to look ahead, and more of an example of just kind of being stuck because it's easy to stay within these pillars and not kind of look forward and develop.
Look, I appreciate you taking the time out to join us as well. And before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice, what would that be? And where's the best place for anyone to connect with you if they want to reach out to you personally and connect? Yeah.
So I think my one piece of advice that I've had, through trial and error too throughout my HR career, don't take things personally, things too personally. I mean, specifically in HR, you are the person that delivers really good news, and then you're also the person that can deliver bad news. You may have had a great relationship with an employee that is no longer an employee, and they may be really sad, depressed, annoyed, but you're that first line defense, and it's not you. And I've had to tell this to my team throughout the years too, that you're the first line defense, and you know what? At the end of the day, you're protecting the company, you're protecting your bosses. You can't take that to heart. And as you go throughout your career, you do develop a thick skin. But my advice for any HR leader, and even up and coming HR leaders, like, don't take it too personally.
And where's the best place for everyone to connect with you?
Sure, Veracelle at residenthome.com, and I'm on LinkedIn, and you can reach me there. I think there's a paper company in Brazil also called Veracelle, but they spell it differently. So sometimes I may get ads for paper. I'm not even kidding you. Spelling's a little differently, but if you spell my name correctly, I'll answer.
You'll be good. I'm sure there's not many with Chief People Officer in the title as well. So I'm sure I'll find you on LinkedIn. Well, look, thanks for joining us. And for everyone on LinkedIn, appreciate you taking time out as well to join us. If you're new to the podcast, as always, head over to hrddleaders.com/podcast. You can subscribe via your favorite platform. And obviously go check out more about Resident as well. And even today I was crazy. I saw one of your mattresses, 500,000 sold. Like, I was
Good.
like, what?
Good.
I need to get one as well. It's pretty credible. So again, appreciate it as always.
Thanks for having me, Chris. This is a lot of fun.
See ya. Bye.
Take care.